His House, out on Netflix now, new horror film that tells the story of a couple that escapes from the war in South Sudan and finds themselves as refugees in England. They are granted asylum with some heavy restrictions. They're not allowed to move anywhere else than their assigned temporary house, which, by the way, is in horrible condition. There are holes in the wall, it's visibly run down despite being a large space. They can't legally work. They have to come in for weekly reports, and most of all, they're required to assimilate into the Western culture. They do try. The husband, Bol, is more on board with that. He tries to go out, learn some football songs, to mingle in the pub with the other men. He, in general, is more receptive to fitting in. The wife, though, Ryle, is more guarded. She doesn't go out much. She is clearly overwhelmed by the culture shock, but also just doesn't want to throw away her own heritage just like that. What's more is that the two clearly suffer from PTSD, not just from the war, but also from the travel by sea, which, as we quickly learn, swallowed the life of their young daughter. As it soon turns out, the ghosts of their past have followed them to England, quite literally. There is something living in the walls, haunting the pair of protagonists, and it actually has a lot to do with the events and the culture that they left behind. So it's an interesting film right from the start because it takes a situation which I remember quite vividly from just a few years back, which was the massive refugee crisis in Europe, but turns it around to show it from the perspective of the actual refugees. And that's a perspective that is partly haunting because of the glimpses of what they went through on that other side, but also because of the reception in Europe. The people around them are clearly looking down at them. Really very fond of the refugees coming in. The reactions vary from mildly disrespectful to downright abusive. There's one great scene where a bunch of teenagers harass Ryle and call her names out on the street and tell her to go back to Africa. But the unexpected part is that they're all black as well. So it's not the white on black racism that's the most commonly criticized in media. It's something slightly else, and yet it is believable and perhaps even more depressing because of that. So this is one layer of the film, dealing with being cut off from everyone you know, from your country, language, customs, even clothes, and trying to find yourself in this new situation with very little support from other people. And the second layer is the actual supernatural horror, which has to do with the African folklore. Now here's the thing. The horror layer is itself pretty competent and explores this sort of new manner of haunting that's not really present in European culture, so it is something new and fresh. And yet, I found it somewhat lacking when it was put side to side with the mundane struggles of everyday life that I just talked about. In a weird way, it was much more uncomfortable to watch these people in more common real life scenarios than being haunted by ghosts. Maybe that's a personal thing for me, but I do believe that the scariest monsters out there are humans. And that goes both ways. On the one hand, because of what we're capable of doing to one another, the hate and anger and violence, but also the indifference. And on the other hand, the way it all happens right here, the way our imagination can scare us more than any physical thing. And both of those aspects are somewhat present in the film, but I felt like at the end of the day, they were overshadowed by the actual haunting, by the literal ghosts, which in comparison just didn't feel as unsettling. So it's a weird scenario because the film tries to do two different things and on paper is quite competent with both. But perhaps because of the relatively short time, it tries to juggle them both and it just doesn't work as well in concert as it perhaps should have. It's not that it fails completely. I think it's still a decent film, but to be completely honest, I would much rather just watch a straight drama with these two characters in this situation. Just throw away the haunting, keep the PTSD and the flashbacks and the horrors of everyday life, and that's it. As it is, I did find the movie okay, but somewhat lacking. Although I can see some people who are more into the traditional supernatural horror liking it more than I did, because there are definitely things to like in here.